So, welcome. Let's talk about the Nikon D780. I've got the 3, 4, 5 minute version, which I hope you'll stick around and watch, where I'll run through very quickly what I think of the D780, why I got it, etc, etc. And then after that we'll go on to the longer version if you've got time to hang around, and we'll look a bit more in depth at the reasons why I changed and what I think of it so far. So the quick version. I'm a wedding photographer. I've used Nikon for since 1990 something, 94 or 3 I think. 2 years ago I changed from my my D750, which I'd used for 2 years for weddings and families and boudoir and all the other stuff, for reasons which I'll explain in the long version, changed to Sony A7iii, 3 prime lenses, 35, 50 and 85, all 1.4s, and started shooting weddings and all the other stuff probably in the last 2 years, bearing in mind of course this year 2020 has been a bit of a slow year as far as weddings go, but I think I've still clocked up maybe 30, 34, 35 weddings over that 2 years. Actually put about 75,000 shots onto the camera, so I've been reasonably busy, and as you would expect after that length of time and taking that many photos, got pretty proficient at using the Sony. Found all the tips, tricks and everything else, how to use it and how to set it up for a wedding anyway. And what I've now done is changed back to Nikon, and specifically the D780, which I'll give you my thoughts about in a few seconds. Very briefly, the reason I changed back to Nikon is because during lockdown, so from wherever that was, March, April, for whatever it was, a couple of months, and then the more recent lockdown version 2, and of course things have been slow anyway, so there's been a lot more spare time this wedding season than I would normally have, and I spent a lot of that time going through my previous wedding shoots and families and boudoir and all the other stuff, just to re-edit some stuff and maybe try and get some new looks, create some new presets, and I found myself looking back at shots from when I had the Nikon, and in fact even back to when I was shooting with my other Nikon, the D700, the legendary D700, and it was actually that caught my eye first. I thought, I love these photos. There was something about the photos that I didn't see when I'd shot photos for the last 2 years with Sony. The Sony pictures seem very realistic. They seem to take reality and give you a picture, a photo that is an exact copy of reality, which is what everyone raves about. They want absolute perfect sharpness. They want to be able to count people's eyelashes at 30 feet, perfect colour rendition, perfect sharpness all the way across the frame, no light fall off across the frame, and that seems to be the kind of standard for what photography should be. But when I look back 6 years ago that I was using this as my main camera, I love the photos. They just had a certain look. Anyway, we'll go into that more in the long version. So that prompted me to change back to Nikon. I then had to decide which Nikon I was going to use. Ended up choosing the D750 in spite of the fact there's very little information online about the D780. There's very little information online about the D780, which is kind of why I'm doing this this video, because maybe it'll help you decide whether or not you'd like to invest in a D780. What do I think of it so far? Well, I've had it a week. I sold all my Sony stuff. I've got a couple of lenses still to go, but that's all gone. Got the Nikon, as I say, just over a week ago. We're in lockdown 2, so I haven't been able to do any paid shoots. So I photographed my wife and cats, and we've got chickens, and I've had to play around with it. It's a Nikon, so within 10 minutes I was very familiar with it, and I expected it to be very similar to my D750 that I used for 2 years ago. And in some ways it is, but of course it's got the Z6 mirrorless system embodied within it as well. And cut to the chase, I love it. Okay, I did toy with the idea of getting rid of all my Sony stuff and buying a D780 months and months ago. Gave the idea up. Did a couple of other photo shoots. I've done some weddings. Did another wedding with the Sony, and was thinking while I was doing the wedding, maybe I wish I had the Nikon. So I was sort of shall I, shan't I for many weeks before I actually took the plunge and actually changed over. And there was a risk, I guess, that I would have regretted selling my best all-round camera, probably, for a wedding photographer, the Sony A7 III, and moving to something which I really couldn't find out an awful lot about online. But anyway, it is gorgeous. I love it, and if you want to stay around for the second part, which we're about to start, I will explain a bit more detail about why I've changed from Sony, why I love the Nikon, and what I'm hoping for the future. So, if you're thinking about buying a D780, you won't be disappointed. There are a few slightly negative things that people have said about the D780, in that it's only a tiny upgrade from the D750. Sorry guys, I don't know if you're professional photographers, but this is actually quite a decent upgrade from the D750, even using the viewfinder, the DLSR camera rather than the back screen, the mirrorless camera. They have made quite a few upgrades there. Not big upgrades, but for me as a wedding photographer, quite useful upgrades. And of course, you've got the with a flick of a press of a button, you've got the Z6 mirrorless camera there as well. Plus, and a big plus for me, it's in a proper camera body with proper buttons. My Sony, okay. Let's get on to why I changed from Nikon to Sony in the first place. Let me explain that. So, I wear glasses, and for reading, for close-up stuff. So when I want to look at the back screen, I need glasses. When I want to talk to people, or 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 4 years ago, when I wanted to talk to people, I took them off. When I wanted to look through the viewfinder, I took them off. I had that set so that I didn't need glasses. So I was forever on, off with glasses, and it was a complete pain in the bum. Obviously, by moving to a mirrorless camera with an EVF, it meant I didn't need to do that because I could do everything through the EVF. That was one thing. Using the EVF also meant that I could set the exposure correctly, which was, everyone at the time was saying that the Sony A7 III was the best thing since sliced bread, and you will enjoy being able to set the exposure correctly. Fine, okay, yeah, that's true. Forgotten the word now. In-body stabilisation would also help me get shots that I couldn't get with a DLSR, and the sort of pressure to move away from a DLSR I felt mounting through. That was 2018. I wanted to get the new, as it was back then, Nikon mirrorless camera, the Z6 and 7, the Z6 as it would have been, and hung on till that was announced. I even pre-ordered it before the specs came out. Then the specs came out, and what a disappointment. Single card slot, wedding photographer, just simply no. I just could not risk going to a wedding and finding that the card, getting home and plugging it in and finding the card had failed. It's just not an option. So that one thing just completely ruled the Z6 out. Also the focus at the time, I think it had face recognition, but no IAF. Even the face recognition was pretty basic at the time. So wanting to change to mirrorless to keep up with technology, to have the best camera available for what I did. 2 years ago, almost to the day actually, we're just coming up to the end of November, sold most of my Nikon gear. I kept my D700 and actually my 50mm lens, and sold all the other Nikon stuff and moved across to Sony. So that was why I changed to Sony. So what was my experience like with the Sony A7 III? Okay, it's a technological marvel, I have to admit. It is crammed full of technology. There are so many things you can change, so many things you can set. You can make that camera into the absolute camera of your dreams. You can program every single button to do hundreds of different things, and which is obviously great. Actually, it's not great, because it took me probably about 3 months and about 5 or 6 weddings to find the best way to have the camera set up to actually be able to shoot a wedding without spending way too long fiddling through the menus and where's that gone? I know that's somewhere here, and obviously everyone says the Sony menu system is difficult, and it is. Even though you get used to it, it's not intuitive, and that, for me, maybe it's just because I'm a Nikon user for years and years and years, maybe it's not, but this, you pick a Nikon up, and I guess it's the same for Canon. Be honest, I've never shot a Canon in my life, but you pick one of these up and it's kind of intuitive. Things are where you expect them to be. Things work the way you expect them to. The learning curve to use this is tiny, minutes. The learning curve for the Sony was, as I say, weeks and weeks and thousands of photographs. Finally got the thing working in the way that I could use it at a wedding without constantly going into the menus. I got the buttons set to the things that I found that I needed the most and used the most. And from then on, it wasn't too bad. But I had a couple of problems which have never gone away. And those problems have stopped me becoming in love with a Sony A7 III. Number one, it's, even with the buttons all set, they're not labelled. So it takes a heck of a long time to remember, of course you haven't got any buttons down this side, they're all down this side. You've got no buttons on the front on the Sony, they're all clustered over here and on the top. So you've got to think now, which one was it? Was it that one? No, it must have been this one. No, oh, maybe I had it on the control. Oh yeah, that's... So even when you programmed it, unless you use that camera almost every day, you very quickly forgot, which one's the focus area? Is it this one or is it on the control wheel? And you were forever, I mean, as I say, so the ergonomics, the use of it as a wedding photographer, you want everything to hand and be able to use it really quickly, I never really got to grips with. The comfort of actually using the camera is nothing like using one of these guys. This, I can hold this in my hand all day long, and I do, and I had to do that with the Sony. And the Sony is a tiny little thing, you can only get 2 fingers on it, and it's claimed that it's small and light, and that's an advantage. No, it's not, because this is a 50mm lens. You put the 50mm 1.4 lens on the Sony and it's about 10mm bigger, and it's about 3 times the length of this, and the lens itself weighs as much as this camera and lens combination. It is not light. It is small, which actually is a bad thing because it makes it, you know, more of an effort to hold it. You haven't got such a good grip. And as I say, it's heavier than the Nikon equivalent. There was a few other niggling things, but one more thing I mentioned is it's a bit, you might think I'm a bit strange here, a bit zen, a bit tree hugger, but there's actually something about DLSRs and the creative process in photography that is missing from mirrorless cameras. Let me explain. Back in the day, when you had a film camera, you took the shots, you waited another week before you'd finish that roll of film, sometimes. I didn't process my own films. You popped that film in the post, you sent it off, you waited 4 days, and you got your pictures back. That's kind of something happens during that time. There's an anticipation, there's an expectation, a hope that you've created some good photographs. And it's not until you get the photos back that you see that. And that's actually a satisfying process. The do it, the wait, the anticipation, the build up, and then they arrive in the post. With the DLSR, when I first got my first digital Nikon, which I think was 2007, that disappeared. Mostly, but not completely, because you take a shot with this, you look through the viewfinder, you see reality. Proper reality. You take the shot, the photo appears on the rear screen if you've got auto review on. So you have to take your eye away from the viewfinder and look at the rear screen. And there's a disconnect between those two. You can take a shot that looks okay through the viewfinder, obviously, because it's reality, and the back screen will be completely black or completely white. It'll be out of focus, it'll be any number of things. So you as a photographer have to get those things right to get a good picture on the back, and there's a disconnect between what you see and what you get. And I believe, for me anyway, that is part of the creative process, that I can take a picture of reality and what I get on the back screen a tenth of a second later is not reality. It's I'm trying to create something that's better than reality, something that's got more character, more depth, that tells a story that just looking out there doesn't give you. You don't get that with a mirrorless camera, because when you look through the viewfinder, what you see is what you get. You set everything as you want it, you press the shutter, and if you've got auto review on, you look through the viewfinder still and that picture pops up. But you don't actually realise it's even popped up. It's just that reality has stopped moving because what you're looking at is the photo that you just took. So there's no disconnect between what you see and what you get. It is the same, identical, the same. Even the depth of field is the same. So I felt the Sony took away something, and it added a layer, a huge layer of technology, which, even though I eventually got used to using the Sony, it often interfered with the creative process of creating the scene in front of the camera, because that's what photography is about. Certainly as a wedding photographer, some of the shots you just take, obviously, you get the best picture you can of what's in front of you, but a lot of the time you're doing some creation, you're putting people together, you're getting people to stand next to this window, and you're doing it for a reason, to get a good photograph. You're being creative. I found that the technology of the camera then got in the way, and I had to think more about the camera than I wanted to. With a Nikon, I basically don't think about what I have to do to the camera to get the shot. I just do it. If I need to change any settings, I will be talking to the people, and I'll often be fiddling with the camera, and I'll just have a quick look. Yeah, that's okay, and I can take the shot. With the Sony, it was far more complicated. I've got to look at the camera, got to fiddle with this, press that button, do that. Is that right? Yeah, that's it. And I've just lost that connection with the people that I'm taking a photograph of. So that was another reason that I have the problem with the Sony. Added to, as I say, looking back through Lightroom, through the thousands of photos that I've taken of weddings, to even right back to the D700 here, the photos just look better. Simple as that. They're not as crisp, they're not as sharp, there's possibly not as much dynamic range, so technically they're not as good. I'm talking about the D700 here. But they're more pleasing as photographs. Maybe calling them a work of art is going too far, but I think I can offer clients a better looking photograph with Nikon than I could with the Sony. So that's why I looked to change back to Nikon. So when I started to think about changing back to Nikon, what cameras did I have to choose from? Well, I didn't want to go back to the D750 because that would have felt really like going back and taking a big step back. And the D750 came out, I think, in 2014, so it's now a 6-year-old camera. So I wanted something a bit more up to date, so I thought about the D850. The D5 or D4 and D5, too big, too heavy to hold all day for a wedding. So I didn't even consider that. Also a bit expensive as well. So I didn't really consider those. So D850, same size as these guys, but 45 megapixels. Do I really want that? I've used a D800 for some of my weddings for a period of time, and the 36 megapixel photos were definitely slower to edit in Lightroom than the 24 megapixels. And going to 45 would have really made Lightroom bog down, and I just don't need 45 megapixels for the work I do. So that took that out of the equation, which left the D780. That's really the only new camera that Nikon have come out with, the only new DLSR in the last few years. So I started investigating that, and that's when I found that there was very little information online about the D780. So the D780, what can I tell you about it? It's a D750. It feels like a D750. The grip actually feels even better. It's a little bit lighter, certainly lighter than my D700 here. So they've managed to get a bit of weight off of it. It's much more comfortable. The button layout is pretty much as the D750, although they have added a dedicated exposure lock button, which is nice to see. And of course it's the semi-professional range, if you like, of Nikon cameras. The D800, the D850, the D700 are all the professional range of cameras, and as such have got buttons on top of the dial here. The mode is set by pressing that button and winding the wheel round, and that has got memory banks. So if you want to set the camera up to do, let's say, as I've actually set this one up yesterday, to do off-camera flash, then I can set everything I want to get off-camera flash working, manual mode, spot metering and all the other stuff, and I can save it as in the menu bank in the professional range of cameras. And I'll be honest, it's a complete pain in the arse, because when you go back and select, first of all you've got to go into the menu to select the menu bank that you want to use. When you do that, if you make any changes to it and then you go back to shooting in aperture priority, it saves those changes. You haven't got a baseline to work from. It's completely rubbish. I don't know why Nikon ever do it. Whereas the semi-professional cameras have got something much more useful. They've got U1 and U2, and you save the setting that you've got the camera set to now. You save it to U1 or U2 and flip around to U1 or U2, and the camera just instantly becomes what you've set that to. Any changes you make are temporary. If you go back to aperture priority and then the next day, the next wedding, the next month, go back to U1, it's as it was when you originally set it. It hasn't saved the changes you made on that last occasion. So it's good. It works. It's very quick, it's very simple, and it works. And it saves a lot more stuff than the supposed professional memory banks. So that's one big thing that I like the D780 over the more professional ones. As far as differences to the D750, As I say, not an awful lot. The sensor, I'm sure, is just as sharp, but sharpness doesn't come top of the list of things for me. Picture quality does, and this, it's just fantastic. I think it's got a slightly higher, more dynamic range than D750. It has got a low pass filter, which slightly reduces the sharpness, but again, it's only if you're counting eyelashes 30 feet away that it's going to make any difference whatsoever. Right, things that they have improved. One thing that I use, that I like to use a lot, is spot metering. So I link the exposure spot to the focus point, so that whatever I'm focused on is perfectly exposed. The background and all that can do whatever it likes, but I know that I've got good exposure on my subject. The problem comes if you use auto area. Now, the D750 allegedly had face detection, so you could allegedly put it on auto, point the camera at a person, hit the back button focus, and it would focus on the face, and it would expose to the face. It didn't. It didn't work. The face detect, as far as the focus went, was iffy at best, and the exposure was all over the place. This is perfect. The auto area and face detect through the viewfinder is possibly not, it's not as good as my Sony as far as face detect and eye autofocus. I say it's not as good. It possibly is. I haven't really tested it on a proper paid job, but certainly testing it out on photos and on my wife and even on the cats, it picks the face up, and I would say it's focusing on the eyes, if it possibly can. If you get the focus point between the eye, sort of there, then there is no focus point to focus on the eyeball. But if you just make sure that you press the back button focus and it finds the face, if you just then tiny move the camera around until there's a focus point actually on the eye, hit the shutter, it's getting eye autofocus pretty well spot on, and the exposure is perfect as well. It's linking the exposure to whatever focus point it uses, even in auto area. So I'm hoping that I can actually shoot through the viewfinder using auto area, single point exposure, and not have to worry about keep moving the focus point around on the back screen. So that looks really promising, and for me as a wedding photographer will make a big difference. Okay, I think from the sort of D750 point of view, that's probably the big change. No pop-up flash, but I haven't used a pop-up flash forever, and I'm sure most professional photographers would never use a pop-up flash. They say it's useful for controlling the Nikon speed lights with that register the light flashes from the pop-up flash. Does anyone use that anymore? I mean, I just pop a Godox wireless remote on and use off-camera flash that way. It's much better, much more reliable. So then going on to the Z6 kind of features on the rear screen. So if I just press the live view button, I now have basically a Z6 using the rear screen, but with the advantage I've got buttons. I've got a professional sized body that I can hold properly. The focus is fantastic. I've seen several videos, many videos actually, about the Z6 and its weird focusing. Well, I've got this on large area, so it will focus on whatever it feels like focusing on. And I don't know if you can see, you probably can't, but that is now focusing on the face of the photo up there. But if it's not, and I want it to, I want to tell it where to focus. I think this is great. I just touch the screen, and I don't know if you can see it from there. There's now a yellow box on her face, and it's tracking that face all across the screen. And again, I can use single point exposure, which will track which will expose for that box, wherever that box is, it will expose for. If the box, like it has now, goes off and it's not tracking the right thing, I just press the minus button and we're back to where we were. There's no big deal. People are saying, and maybe this is true for the Z6, people are saying, oh, you've got to press this button and that button to get it back to auto area, and it only tracks faces in auto area, and that's a problem. Well, if there's 2 or 3 faces to track and it tracks the wrong one, you just touch the other one and it'll be tracking that face. And if you want to cancel it and go to another one, you press the minus button. That just seems so simple. It's really no more complicated than my Sony was. And even better, it's got all the buttons. The right buttons in the right place as well. So I think that is going to be stunningly good, and I have very high hopes for shooting a wedding with it, which I'm doing in about 2 weeks' time. So after that wedding, I will come back to you with another video, and I will tell you what my experiences are with the D780. I'm very hopeful that they're going to be good experiences. Hope this has been useful. I'll be back in a couple of weeks. Thanks for watching.